Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
We've seen the way that the word evil has kind of melted away, and it's being replaced officially by the word hate. And so anything is bad if it's animated, if it's motivated or animated or expressive of hate. And so, well, what's hate? Well, there's an app for that that'll tell you sort of like, this is officially what hate is.
Right.
And there's no, this is a spiritual enterprise inherently. There's no like hate chemical in the brain. They're not going to find that sort of thing. But they are going to try to find the cognitive precursors that allow a system of law to be created and automated where through the enhancements of machine learning, the system can recognize when people who are plugged into the interface in some way, whether wirelessly or otherwise, are experiencing the kind of cognitive precursors of hate. We already have hate speech laws. We already have the criminalization of hate, whatever that is. And we are well on our way to having a form of governance that is dedicated to 24/7, round the clock, every instant, every minute, every day, everywhere within reach in the world, monitoring people and determining when they are on the verge of engaging in hate or spreading hate, whereupon some sort of punishment or precautionary intervention will be made. Those who have seen Minority Report will be familiar with pre-crime, the idea of pre-crime. Things are headed in this direction.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I am your host for today, Seth Barron, managing editor of the American Mind, and I'm joined just by James Poulos, the editor of the American Mind. James, how are you?
I am rocking and rolling, Seth. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And I'm glad to hear that you're rocking and rolling. I'm rocking and rolling. We're going to rock it.
Rock and roll will never die.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, and you know what? David Bowie said, this ain't rock and roll. This is genocide.
This is genocide. How would that land today? One can only wonder.
I've wondered about that. But before we get to the question of genocide, let's talk about some documents that were dropped. A whistleblower released documents regarding a shadowy anti-disinformation group called the Cyber Threat Intelligence League, or CTIL. Now, the CTIL evidently started as a volunteer project of data scientists and military intelligence veterans, but then became absorbed, and this was around 2018, I guess, became absorbed by Homeland Security and other elements of the US and UK governments into what Michael Schellenberger, the journalist, is calling the censorship industrial complex. According to Schellenberger, quote, the whistleblower's documents describe everything from the genesis of modern digital censorship programs to the role of the military and intelligence agencies, partnerships with civil society organizations and commercial media, and the use of sock puppet accounts and other offensive techniques, unquote. So I gather the notional purpose of this group, the CTIC, is to combat the, inject bleach, anti-science memes that supposedly put society in danger. But in reality, the group's aims are much more nefarious. James, I know this is a topic that's, close to your heart. What do you make of this?
Near, but perhaps not very dear. This stuff has been bubbling along for a long time, and Gabe Kaminsky at the Washington Examiner deserves a lot of credit for bringing it into the mainstream at the level of nuts and bolts of shoe leather journalism. Believe it or not, there's only so much you can do as a political theorist or even as an editor to try to ring the alarm bell about these kinds of things, using logic, using circumstantial evidence, using political theory, and just using, common sense with some kind of megaphone attached to it. So, when I tweet things like "Global Britain strikes again," and people sort of scratch their heads, I don't really have time to do what a Gabe Kaminsky does, or what the intrepid reporters who are rolling out the files on this hopefully not so shadowy organization. But this is the kind of thing I've been talking about, and others have been, capital N noticing as well for a number of years. The sad fact is that the Anglophone West has become a petri dish for digital tyranny, for the consolidation of all information and data into the hands of people whose names we don't know, who we can't vote in and we can't vote out, and the machines that they control. And because that sort of activity has been understood intuitively to be rather unconstitutional, the powers that be have pursued these measures in the closest available adjacent Anglophone democracy. And so that's the rest of the Five Eyes: Canada, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Over this span of time, New Zealand has kind of backed away and is moving toward China's orbit. Canada, you got you got Fidel Castro's son up there saying that Canada isn't really a nation state. We've gotten beyond all that, using technology, originally developed to fight the bad guys, to zap the truckers' bank accounts and so forth. In the UK, there's just been a hive of activity of this sort going on for a long time, and I think what's going on in Australia has also been pretty unflattering. So we're next, and the Biden administration has made no bones about their lust for pursuing this exact kind of plan, because the goal is obviously to establish a single form of government, a single form of digital governance across the Anglosphere, and sort of radiate it out from there. Now, this all sounds pretty gnarly, and certainly I would be the first to say that it is in fact gnarly. But if we're going to not get caught up in the feels of it all, we need to take a step back and recognize that this is a new form of government that is being pursued for reasons that go above and beyond, persecuting guerrilla Americans or whatever. The West is in a tight spot. We created these technologies. We thought that they would perfect and complete our form of rule, the rules-based international order. We thought that we would Americanize the world with these technologies, and in certain respects, we did. But it came as a big shock to the folks at the top, the engineers of this system, that actually, wow, people who do not just want to be absorbed into global America can also use this technology, and perhaps they can even build some of it out in still more powerful and effective ways than we do. And so we're now living in that world. We're not living in the world where America has been totally Disneyfied, and so the rest of the world has been Disneyfied, and everyone's happy living in Disneyland, and the humans and the machines sort of hold hands and sing, "We are the world," as they dance around the globe. We're living in multipolarity. It's a shadowy world. Every major digital power is scrambling to shore up its own sovereignty at home, while ensuring that it doesn't get steamrolled abroad by someone else. And amid that chaotic landscape, I think it's fair to say, still pretty shell-shocked elites, in spite of their arrogance, they are scrambling too. And I really do think that the ruling sensation up there is one of fear and one of a feeling that if we don't do this, it's over for us. I, of course, disagree, but I think that's what's going on. And it is probably inevitable that this stuff has gotten out, because it is so fundamentally at odds with so much of not just constitutionalism in America, but really the Anglo-American legal tradition. And I think it ultimately springs from a deeply spiritual place, from a place of this yearning to perfect the law. If we can just perfect the law, then everything else will work out. And we've invented this thing called code, which humans are just kind of almost an afterthought now. It's really just pure math, and we can't really trust the people. Can't trust the monarchy failed, oligarchy failed, democracy failed. What do we have left? We have the machines. We have math. And so, if we can just have the computers perfect the law, then maybe we can all survive what's unfolding. Again, I think this is ultimately madness, but it is going to help us to take a step back and realize that we're not just dealing with the crazies, quote unquote, or the elites, a shadowy cabal. There's always some of that in the mix, but this is about something bigger.
So there's this. I'm just looking over some of these charts and quotes that Schellenberger is tweeting about. There's like a PowerPoint slide called the information environment, and it's broken down: physical dimension, informational dimension, cognitive dimension. And one of these, top researchers, Sarah Jane Terp, a British defense researcher, says, quote, "Cognitive security is the thing you want to have." She said this in 2019. You want to protect that cognitive layer. It's about pollution. Misinformation, disinformation is a form of pollution across the internet. It's funny to think about it in those religious or spiritual terms you were talking about, and thinking about. I mean, it's kind of like a very puritanical view of discourse, right? Like that some things are just so dirty and they can dirty your mind. So I guess we have to, sort of reminds me of, like, I don't know, temperance era talk, like we need, or Comstock law type stuff. Like we need to eradicate this filth before it infects people's minds. But what is the goal here? Is the goal just like total spectrum dominance, this sort of thing, like control of thought?
Yeah, I think that there's a judgment being made that the only possible form of governance in this digital world that is incorporating all things into it through the sheer authority of technology is a governance that penetrates down into the most intimate possible places in every sentient being. I mean, it sounds like science fiction, but cognitive security. Like, what are we talking about here? We've seen the way that the word evil has kind of melted away, and it's being replaced officially by the word hate. And so anything is bad if it's animated, if it's motivated or animated or expressive of hate. And so, well, what's hate? Well, there's an app for that. It'll tell you sort of like, this is officially what hate is.
Right.
And there's no, this is a spiritual enterprise inherently. There's no like hate chemical in the brain. They're not going to find that sort of thing. But they are going to try to find the cognitive precursors that allow a system of law to be created and automated, where through the enhancements of machine learning, the system can recognize when people who are plugged into the interface in some way, whether wirelessly or otherwise, are experiencing the kind of cognitive precursors of hate. We already have hate speech laws. We already have the criminalization of hate, whatever that is. And we are well on our way to having a form of governance that is dedicated to 24/7, around the clock, every instant, every minute, every day, everywhere within reach in the world, monitoring people and determining when they are on the verge of engaging in hate or spreading hate, whereupon some sort of punishment or precautionary intervention will be made. Those who have seen Minority Report will be familiar with pre-crime, the idea of pre-crime. Things are headed in this direction. And the logic of it is all too elegant. why wouldn't we want pre-crime? Crime's very messy. Crime can be very violent. Crime can be unpredictable. If only we can stop these threats before they start, we'll all be better off. When you say it that way, it sounds pretty great. But then you have to consider the puritanical aspect, and I mean this literally. Sinners in the hands of an angry God was the sort of iconic or exemplary sermon of the Puritan era in America. The idea is, if we do not implement divine law on earth, then we will suffer evils. Misfortunes will befall us. Divine retribution will come down. And so the key to life on earth is to master justice, to get justice perfectly right. In order to get justice perfectly right, you have to purify the law. And if, as the Puritans believed, monarchy is actually not so good, then you have this challenge of statecraft, which is, well, how do you purify the law in a regime that is not monarchical, that is not aristocratic, but is in fact radically democratic, in the same way that the Puritans worked so hard to radically democratize Christianity, taking huge steps away from the ancient church and of course breaking with Catholicism and all the rest. And Alexis de Tocqueville covers a lot of this in the first couple chapters of Democracy in America. He's like, if you want to understand America, you got to understand the origin of the Anglo-Americans, and if you want to understand that, you got to look at the Puritans. So I'm not just making this up as I go along, I swear. And you can see these patterns reflected very vividly, not just in the tech worship that we've got going on these days, where certain Silicon Valley denizens will say, "Hey, don't worry, you guys. We're just going to automate all this stuff, and we'll solve politics, and we'll fix America, and there will just be so much productivity and growth that will just blast off out of all of our problems and all of humanity's problems." It's not just there; it's even more vivid, I would say, in wokeness itself. What is really going on in wokeness? A lot of people want to say, well, it's cultural Marxism, or it's this or it's that, it's postmodernism. It is justice worship, and it is the contemporary expression of this pattern of puritanical, really, theology that says the way to purify the law in a democratic situation is through mastering spiritual instruction, mastering the educational institutions of the regime, and using those to ensure that the people who are graduated from those institutions and put into positions of power have the proper spiritual code installed, so to speak, so that they can infuse the law with that kind of spiritual perfection without having to rely on a king or on aristocrats or on greedy CEOs or fill in the blank. So that's what we're grappling with. It seems to be a super profound break with all that has come before in America, and in certain respects it is, but in other respects, the wokies are maybe more correct than they really understand, because they keep trying to drag us back to 1619 and say like, oh, this is a problem. Well, it kind of is a problem, and the problem is one that they have inherited and are now falling prey to in the same unsustainable way. Puritanism couldn't sustain itself as originally designed. It fractured. It sort of melted into all kinds of utopianism and universalism and Unitarianism, Oneida, all kinds of craziness. And so there are these contending forces in the U.S. One that's very spiritually anarchical, and one that's very spiritually autocratic, I guess you could say. And in a strange sense, those two bipolar tendencies were both present in the Puritans. And working through that stuff and getting beyond it is going to be a challenge. But I must say, I really do think we can do it in the end.
Well, it's interesting. Like in Ireland last week, we saw, these huge riots after an Algerian migrant stabbed 5 people. So there was a lot. And, Ireland has been very much in the forefront of pushing, migration and so forth. So there's a lot of contention and a lot of anger about it. So there were fires, all kinds of. I think they were trying to burn down like a migrant hotel. And in the wake of that, the Taoiseach, I don't know exactly how you pronounce the Irish word for prime minister, but the prime minister, Leo Varadkar, said, I think it's now very obvious to anyone who might have doubted us that our incitement hatred legislation is just not up to date. It's not up to date for the social media age. And we need that legislation through, and we need it through in a matter of weeks. He's referring to some new bill that will very much tighten the screws on free expression. He said, because it's not just the platforms who have a responsibility here, there's also the individuals who post messages and images online that stir up hatred and violence. So the new measure would punish people for, quote, possessing material likely to incite violence or hatred, which Elon Musk said could include memes on one's phone. Just, possessing something that they determine to be hateful. Now, it's funny because you could argue that the Irish people having riots and burning things, that's kind of like an expression, that's the language of the unheard, right? Isn't that what we learned a few years ago?
Oh,
that
yeah.
Riots typically reflect like an injustice.
No
or
justice, no peace.
Yeah, a feeling of of righteous grievance. But in this case, here's my question. Why is it, okay, yes, the governments, and now Ireland is obviously not in the Five Eyes, but it may as well be. Yes, they want to control minds, they want to control thought. But why is it so much about this question, the national question, the question of borders and migration and settlement? Is it because in that they have this, Puritan-inspired vision of the lion and the lamb laying down next to each other? Is it that they see a completely multicultural, multiracial, open-bordered society as easier to control? Why that always seems to be like the primary thing. Like let's get to work on shutting people up on this issue. What do you think?
Yeah. One layer of it is I always go back to something Steve Saylor said not long ago. In spite of the fact that Steve is he's metaphorically down the street in SoCal here, and he wrote a great piece on my relative neighbors, the men who wear gold chains, who now inhabit so much of the San Fernando Valley. So I like to read Steve when he's doing the kind of culture stuff. I'm too innumerate to kind of follow the other stuff. But one thing that he did say a while back that has stuck with me is he described the Cold War as a war for the control of the global left. Which I thought was quite powerful. World War II sort of destroys the global far right. You could say, painting with a broad brush, but sort of, work with me here. And so, in a post-war world where the political left and left ideology really triumphed, on the spectrum from Roosevelt to Mao, and all of these decolonial activities begin because the British ran out of money and the French were, momentarily disposed by the Nazi occupation and so forth. Portuguese hung on for a very long time, but in the end, not even they could cling on to their really shameful colonies in Southern Africa. anyway, you have basically a left world. And you have a big communist bloc, and then you have the other guys. And the other guys have really a very serious strategic problem. People forget, but communism wasn't just really good at killing people. It was really good at converting people, and specifically converting them out of Christianity. There's a sort of Jewish communist relations that probably a story for another day. But as far as ex-Christians converting to communism, this is important because this resulted in the flipping of regimes, and it was really looking like, Greece was sort of saved from communism by the skin of his teeth. Italy was very close to flipping. France, arguably, pretty close to flipping in the post-World War II environment.
Sure.
And of course, the UK, really a sort of hotbed of intellectual communism for a long time. Hosted Karl Marx and so forth. And so there was this urgent matter of like, how do you prevent in this left of center post-war world, how do you prevent a sort of mass global conversion to communism? You had to offer people something, and you couldn't offer them fascism. That was off the table. And you couldn't just offer them a small R Republican form of government, because they go, well, there's a People's Republic across the street, and that that looks like the same thing. So maybe we want their brand. So you couldn't just give them kind of like a simple alternative. You had to kind of meet them where they were. And I think that led toward, things like the U.S. supporting decolonization movements, right in the face of the British and French allies. The meltdown in Suez, shifting from a kind of ambivalent or neutral stance on Israel to a pro-Israel stance, really looking for ways to win over constituencies, geopolitical constituencies, to the Western Bloc. And it was pretty successful, but there was one component that was kind of, postponed indefinitely, which was, well, the U.S. is a place where the doors are not wide open, but pretty open, historically open, among countries in the world, to large-scale immigration. And Europe didn't really want to do it that way for, I think, obvious reasons that don't have tremendously much to do with hate, but have to do with the fact that these countries are really quite small, and there really isn't that much land to go around. And, a wave of refugees or of immigrants has profoundly different effects, cultural, social, economic, financial, up and down the chain, than a wave of equal or even greater size would or has in the United States of America. Well, fast forward to now, and sure enough, the bill is coming due, and all of these European countries that managed to slow the tempo of immigration, of migration, of refugees, of assimilation, all of that's been accelerated. And we all know the stories of these countries in Europe where Mohammed is the most popular boy's name, and I think London is now like the most quote unquote diverse city in the world, and on paper, not necessarily a problem, considering that this is the West and we're welcoming and we have the best ideas and we have sort of this big entertainment industry and everyone can kind of, get off or enjoy themselves or party in whatever way they want to, lots of benefits, a lot of different kinds of restaurants. In spite of those things, it really hasn't been enough to supply these countries with sufficient we-ness, WE-NESS, to prevent or forestall the kinds of intense conflicts, street conflicts that you are describing. So I think that that's part of what the game plan is. I think part of it is, look, we just, our birth rates are going down, our sperm counts are going down, our T counts are going down. Like, we need warm bodies, and we're not going to get them from China, and we're not going to get them from Russia, and we might get some of them from India, but we're probably going to get most of them from former colonies where people already speak the language. And when that's the way the table is set, it's a very inviting environment for the kind of rituals of guilt that we see on display, where it's like, well, yes, that is why I'm climbing into the suicide pods so that I can make room for a Nigerian family of 5. It's their
Right.
turn, and I'm going to sit down and pass the mic. I'm going to surrender. That all dovetails in very nicely. But I do think that there is this spiritual component, and I do think it is pretty inescapable. And it does have echoes of this puritanical understanding of how to deal with the problem of social order. The basic idea is purify the law in order to purify people's hearts. And what is that an alternative to, right? The alternative is saying, like, well, actually, it doesn't work very well. That's not what spiritual strength and spiritual growth is all about. This has been a running theme through kind of conflicts within the Christian church over the centuries. But the other main thought on these matters theologically is, well, actually, if you want to purify the heart, that's going to take a little bit more work and a little bit more discipline, and it's going to take more patience and more humility. And you really have to focus on like judging yourself before you judge other people, and enduring the labor of ascetic spiritual practices and condemning yourself instead of condemning your brother, and begging God for forgiveness 24 hours a day, and letting the law sort of render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. So you have these two poles, and I think a lot of this conflict here has been exacerbated by technology. Technology comes along and makes this powerful case that just when you thought that human beings couldn't purify the law after all, well, the super intelligent machines will do it for us. That's very inviting. Geopolitically, that's very inviting, very tempting. And it's unfortunate because, you go down that path, and as we see, you just start surrendering everything to the machines. You start worshiping the machines. You start seeing the machines as your savior, and you start seeing your brain as the part of you that matters most, rather than your heart. And what is needed, in my opinion, it's not just my opinion, but it is my opinion, in order to reassert a kind of human mastery over these machines, is not a juridical or a legalistic kind of spirituality, but one that really does return us to the importance of our heart, and to the importance of locating spiritual strength. What the Orthodox call spiritual athleticism in the heart, to get out of your calculating mind, to get out of the world of calculation and imagination, and to come down into the heart. I think that's ultimately spiritually what's going to give us the juice in order to prevent ourselves from giving into the temptation to become slaves to our machines. But again, it's possible that a lot of folks in the West are going to have to hit the wall on this stuff before realizing that probably a different way is going to be more fruitful.
It's funny though, because there is this almost like diabolical way in which the modern hard left abuses the language of the heart in encouraging us essentially to commit, I don't know, some kind of weird version of like a Christoid suicide in terms of sacrificing everything that the West has for, our Southern neighbors, our Southern brothers, our latest Europeans and Americans. This whole rhetoric about, like, well, remember, Jesus was a refugee, or it's time to, that welcome the stranger, and, giving to the poor and feeding the hungry. All of this, the kind of like, the sort of sob sister Christianity. I'm reminded though of like something our friend Aaron Wren once said to me, which is, and I think this is actually an excellent point that people kind of miss, is that Jesus said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." He didn't say, "Love your neighbor instead of yourself." Right? Like this sense that we are so guilty and so fortunate and so indicted that it's our job just to take a dirt nap, and welcome our invaders. That's really like not exactly the message of the New Testament.
Yes, I would have to agree with you there. This is important. They do make a certain kind of play for the heart, and it is, for all that I just said about the importance of returning to the heart spiritually in order not to lose yourself in the law of the machines. The heart does not start out pure, and that's kind of what they're selling. Is
Uh-huh.
I mean, for the love of God, I drive around LA and I see these billboards. Your feelings are your superpowers. Like, for real. It says it on the billboard, and it's got this like flat art drawing of this ethnically ambiguous girl like moping in bed, and it's just like, man. So yeah, they do make that play, and through that lens, the figure of Jesus is presented, not as like the Lord of all creation who loves you so much that et cetera, but rather as just kind of like a prelude, a sort of like rough
Or
draft.
like a social worker, a guy who works at a safe injection center,
Yes.
naloxoning people.
Really a prelude to the kind of even better and purer and greater victimization and sacrifice
Yeah.
that is expected of the ordinary person today. It's a progressive, really a progressive vision where Jesus didn't have a lot to work with. Is living in this sort of backwoods corner of the empire, and he's just a lowly carpenter and living on the margins of society. And that's why that's just a kind of a prototype of what we need, which is a global regime that is focused around organizing sacrifice. You go to the Old Testament, and it's no greater love than this, to lay down your life for a friend. Yes, that's quite a bit different from uh, uh, climb into the suicide pod and make way for whoever happens to blow into town.
Right. You know what's funny? And then we'll move on to something else. But I kind of feel like, I don't know, even 20 or 30 years ago, maybe pre 9/11, maybe even earlier than that the idea of international development was like had a lot of weight. Like people were really into the idea. People didn't just go to Africa to take pictures of themselves with orphans, but there was serious consideration of like, how do we develop the infrastructure of a modern nation in underdeveloped countries. And this was like a major preoccupation for thoughtful people. But I kind of feel now, of course, we're still spending plenty of money in that arena. It doesn't seem like that we don't really care that much about that question anymore. The answer now is just, well, we'll just move the entire excess population of Africa into Europe or America. It's like, well, let's just bring them here, and that'll kill two birds with one stone. We don't really have to worry about developing down there, which is like fraught with all kinds of corruption and other problems. Just bring them here, and that'll pay for our pensions and alleviate all these other types of guilt. I don't know. It's just food for thought. But let's move to a lighter topic, something that you had suggested, which I think is kind of interesting. Entertainment news. We don't do a lot of entertainment news on the roundtable, but apparently Disney is failing to live up to audience expectations. Its latest movies, The Marvels and Wish, are significantly underperforming at the box office. Now, to my eye, they both look terrible. But what do I know? I don't go to the movies very often. The superhero movies that I've seen are kind of tedious and pretentious. Like they combine like ultra seriousness with just like terrible like dialogue and jokes. This movie Wish, an animated movie. I don't know if you read about it, but I mean, it just looks so cloying. About a little girl and she's friends with a lucky star. I mean, I can't even figure out what it's supposed to be. Anyway, I guess the new standard of success for movies is that they have to make $1 billion. And Disney has fallen well short. James, what do you make of this?
Well, yes, I take full responsibility for introducing entertainment news into the podcast. I guess I'm
I like it.
terminally Angelino after all. But it does speak to some of these larger issues. One of them is, just what it appears to be on the surface, which is woke Hollywood is just not very good. Wokeness has presented quote unquote diversity in a way that is not organically connecting, I guess you could even say spiritually, with American audiences. And there's this question of why. I mean, I don't want to be presumptuous, but there are ways of writing TV series and movies with a very, box checkingly diverse cast of characters with different life paths and whatnot that's actually compelling in the struggle that the characters must go through, in wrestling with the world in which we live, in plotting, in all of the myriad ways that that real artists know how to craft character and story and raising stakes and does sharp dial. I mean, this is just the whole toolkit that we have counted on Hollywood to master, and to master, not just for the sake of giving us something captivating to do while eating the large bucket of popcorn and the Bavarian Legend gigantic pretzel and whatnot, but so that we come away from those experiences feeling like there is a rich human environment that we are all a part of. People laugh at the AMC movies, pre-roll ad that Nicole Kidman does, and there are reasons for that. And if you haven't seen it yet, you should go.
I did see that.
You might.
It was very weird.
Yeah, and my favorite part is when she's like, movies take us to a place that we've never been before, and it flashes on the screen, and it shows the opening shot of Jurassic World where they drive into the theme park, and I'm like, I don't think that means what you think it means. Anyway, some of it is quite ridiculous, but it's coming from a place of the film industry sort of crying out to the audience, saying remember the time when we didn't just check the boxes, and we didn't just genuflect before the right kinds of idols, but we held up a mirror to your life and showed you something that maybe you hadn't seen before or didn't really know what to make of or struggled with in some way that we brought some clarity to. Yeah, you can look at technology and say film and television is kind of obsolete or will just never again be what it used to be. And in some ways that's deserved. And that's all true as far as it goes. But look, art is something that is just part of the human complement. And if it isn't working, that's a sign that something is broken within the artists who are being paid and tasked to do the art. I've seen, I guess, a lot of movies since the pandemic. I feel like it's worth just kind of tracking what's going on. And some of these movies are blockbusters, and some of them are not. What I've felt, and you identified this a little bit, there's just there are real problems with tone. It's not always clear whether the writers expect you to laugh or to shudder, or there's a kind of, there's a confusion as to what moral universe we're in. And I think it really makes a lot of films suffer, whether they are the bigger blockbusters that are supposed to be incredibly, no, this is serious, this woman is going to save the universe, and then it's
right.
And then here's a meme joke, whether it's that or whether it's I just saw Dream Scenario, the latest Nick Cage film the other night, and so much about that movie is so engrossing and so captivating and so fresh and so real. And yet, it just something about the plotting and the characterization, like, what is it really saying? It's not just like a sort of, oh, makes you think, but it sort of makes you think, like, what am I even thinking? Like, it just kind of leaves you a little bit like unsure and disoriented, and ultimately, I think, kind of empty inside.
Sure.
And so this leads us to Pixar and Disney. They've got a big problem. They're losing money. They can't find a new president. They went like super woke, and now they're trying to walk it back. And it's not what it used to be. So my conclusion here is that there's actually, Curtis Yarvin got a lot of like weird feedback and negative feedback from a Substack post of his a while back about the hobbits and the elves, and how the hobbits shouldn't try to like take over the government and bring America back that way, but should really just let the elves like make art that causes other elites to understand that maybe like life is different or richer than what it is that they've turned it into. A lot of people didn't connect with that. I guess there are reasons to be suspicious of that kind of presentation, because unless you're a Tolkien worshiper, it might seem a little weird. But I do think that his underlying point is an important one, which is the lane for really good, true, beautiful, powerful, meaningful, and instructive art is like wide open right now. And actually, technology does make it easier for relatively ordinary people to just take the plunge and create things that can compete with what Hollywood is trying to churn out. It's not gonna work if you just try to like, well, there's explicitly woke content, so we need to make explicitly dissident right content. I don't think that's where the magic happens. I don't think that's what art is good at, and I don't think that's what art is for. Just make the great art, make the human art. I think that's wide open, and I hope and I look forward to people taking advantage of that and giving us something that really speaks to us in a way that matters.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think if you have an industry where at the very top, not artistically at the top, but at the top of the the corporate structure, the main concern is selling $1 billion worth of tickets. Well, then your product is going to be trying to appeal to all to Chicano teenagers in California, as well as the entire Chinese movie going public, and people in Europe, whatever. So it's you've got to right, you're going to wind up with these movies that have tremendous budgets for CGI, and the jokes are just really terrible, sort of like you said, meme jokes, combined with this very kitschy, like, right, the little girl's going to save the world. And unfortunately, I suspect, I don't know, but this broadcast ethic kind of probably works its way down even to more serious works like that Nicolas Cage movie, which I keep thinking I'm supposed to see it, but then I can't make head or tail out of what it's supposed to be. So I probably won't. Let's just quickly touch on the ceasefire. It's not really a ceasefire, but a brief cessation of hostilities between Israel and Hamas in order to effect the release of hostages, and I guess the exchange of prisoners. This is just amping up the American left with its demands for a permanent ceasefire, which essentially seems to me to be a demand for Israel to surrender. Israel cannot fight Hamas. Israel has to, basically accede to all of their demands. That's sort of what they seem to be saying, including, basically turning the whole thing and erasing the state of Israel. I mean, that's essentially what they want to do, or as they like to say, no, we just mean changing. We don't want to erase Israel. We just want to erase it from the map. As though that's not the same thing. In New York City, I think right now they should be shutting down. They're trying to shut down the lighting of the tree at Rockefeller Center. What's bothered me is, I don't know if you saw the thing about in Oakland the other night, they were having a vote about condemning Hamas, and these people were standing up and basically saying, like, look, Hamas didn't even do anything. The idea, Israel killed its own people. There's no evidence that Hamas would never rape anyone because that's anti-Islamic. Like this tendency to like take everything Hamas says as true and pure, and anything that Israel says or does as just blisteringly evil. I've noticed, really troublingly, there's this theme on social media where they take pictures of the released hostages, and either they say, oh, look, they're crying because they're sad to be leaving, like the tender mercies of Hamas, or if they're smiling, it's like, oh, look how nicely they were treated. And then they show like a few pictures, like this woman who was like shot in the leg and is probably in sepsis. And people are insisting that she's lusting after the Hamas captors, that she's like all these kind of things, like, get you a girl who looks at you this way, and basically making it like it's like this really demented rape fantasy, saying that all of these people, these women who were kidnapped by Hamas, that it's been like their peak sexual experience being in captivity, and they keep doubling down on it. It's just a really repulsive. I mean, it's kind of hard to follow. I mean, we're getting into just like rabbit holes out of rabbit holes that are so perverse. It's not even. I kind of don't even want to look into it anymore. It's just it's a true sickness. I don't know. Have you noticed any of this?
I have. I think you gave a very succinct synopsis of what is indeed an enormous termite mound of tunnels into darkness and insanity. And so I salute you. It is really bad. I mean, look, like, you want to argue about like war aims, civilian casualties, military tactics. Okay, fair game. Lots of questions, and I think that forthright Israelis, after a beer or two, would probably agree that, like, well, we don't really know what comes next, and well, so we do, like, we should have done things differently along that border, and like, well, yeah, like, there are deep divides within the government, and that is kind of playing a role in how this is shaking out. Like, okay, but there's a lot of talk these days about the friend-enemy distinction on the right, and how the starting point for political success is to know who your friends are and know who your enemies are. And there's some value to that for sure. But the situation that we're looking at right now, as you illustrated, is the classic situation of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And this is where, maybe it's not so easy as the friend enemy distinction would want, or suggests that as we'd want it to be, because if you're like a critic of Israel, a long-term critic of Israel's foreign policy in the region, let's just put it in as bland of terms as we can. Okay, fine. You've had your maybe you're a tenured professor, maybe you work at an NGO, maybe you're like burrowed away somewhere in the State Department, GS-13 or whatever, and you're a long-term critic of Israel's regional foreign policy. Well, do you then look at Hamas and say, I must go out into the streets and I must wave the banner of Hamas. And I should probably start spray painting buildings and maybe even slapping around some people who seem like they might be Jewish. Like, this is what I must do because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Well, that doesn't really hang together. And yet that's the kind of thing that we are now seeing spread with virality. Virality really means like involuntary transmission. And I almost get the feeling that they're just kind of these people who don't really know what they believe or what their place in the world is or why they should bother getting out of bed in the morning. And they're sort of stumbling around in this, quasi virtual world that we live in, waiting for something to hit them and to kind of take control of their cognitive apparatus. And the thing that managed to get in is the Hamas thing. And they start saying things that are just completely beyond substantiation, and leave them, I think, like, deeply politically and spiritually compromised, where they want to be the good guys, but they're willing to be the bad guys in order to somehow participate in, the moral categories are being blurred away. I was reading some Jean Baudrillard as the hostage situation was really starting to heat up in Gaza. And I'm leafing through this late Baudrillard book, and he talks about how we are now all hostages to this kind of virtual world that's eating everything.
Right.
And we're all sort of complicit in the construction of this weird virtual world, that we want to be a place where there are no more misfortunes. And yet, just through the sheer force of building this thing, it kind of sows the seeds of its own undermining. Like, it doesn't turn out to be a utopia. It turns out to be a place where we're always in a panic that misfortunes are going to find a way of causing catastrophe in the system. I feel like you can just see this like happening to people out there in the world, where it's like you're worried about misfortunes, and yet you're like cheering for Hamas and doing damage to people and property. Like, you have to break the circuit, like perhaps you really do just need to like log off, put the smartphone down. Is it really helping you? Or is it just absorbing you into this kind of psychoactive experience, where, you surrender your personal responsibility and your personal control to a trending outrage or a trending mob?
I would say, well put. It's a pretty frightening scenario, and it's actually, the funny thing is so much of this stuff is like so terminally online. People read, people become convinced that the anti-Israel forces are strong and growing, but real world polling, real world votes don't show that, which I think in a negative feedback loop causes the people who form the real mob, like the types who go and sit in front of the Manhattan Bridge entrance and try to shut down Rosalind Carter's funeral of all things. I think it just reinforces their desperation and their sense then that we need to protest harder and more until we finally succeed in lighting the spark that causes all of America to wake up and turn against the Zionist project. Well, that's about all the time we have for this week. If you want to know more about all the stuff we do, you can go to AmericanMind.org. If you'd like to support our work, you can click the support tab at the top of the page. We deeply appreciate the donations that fund our work. Or you can leave a 5-star review for us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Subscribe to our podcast. Spread the good news by tweeting about us, telling your friends about us, posting our items on social media. We really do appreciate all the support we get, and it's thanks to you, because of you, that we do what we do. Thanks to our production crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri, and thanks to everyone listening. Until next week, this is the Roundtable signing off.